My name is Amelia Marchwood. I'm 63 years old, though most days my body feels closer to 83. The arthritis started in my late 40s, an unwelcome inheritance from my mother's side, but it was the fall 2 years ago that changed everything. A simple misstep on the staircase in the home where I'd lived for 35 years. The home where I'd raised my son Kevin after his father walked out on us when Kevin was just 8. The doctor said I was lucky. A broken hip, a fractured wrist, extensive bruising, but nothing that wouldn't heal with time and physical therapy. Lucky, they called it. They weren't there when Kevin stood in my hospital room, scrolling through his phone as the doctor explained my recovery timeline. They didn't see how his jaw tightened at the words 6 to 8 weeks of in-home care. "Mom," he said after the doctor left, still not looking up from his phone, "we need to talk about arrangements." Arrangements. Such a cold, clinical word, like I was a problem to be solved, not a mother who needed her son. "I can manage at home," I told him, even as pain shot through my hip. "Once the physical therapist gets me on my feet." "That's not realistic," Kevin cut me off. "You live alone in a 2-story house. The bedroom and bathroom are upstairs. You can't even go to the bathroom by yourself right now." He was right, of course, but it was the way he said it, like my weakness disgusted him. Like my need was an imposition. "I could stay with you and Evelyn just until I'm more mobile," I suggested. His home was a sprawling ranch-style house in the suburbs of Chicago, all one level, with wide doorways and a guest room rarely used. Just for a few weeks. Kevin's eyes finally left his phone, but the look he gave me made me wish they hadn't. It was the same look his father gave me the day he left, like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "That won't work," he said flatly. "Evelyn's starting that big project at work, and we have the fundraiser gala coming up. Besides, the guest room is being converted into a home office." I felt something cold spreading through my chest. Throughout Kevin's childhood, our tiny apartment had always made room for his needs. His science projects sprawled across our kitchen table for weeks, his friends crashing on our pull-out sofa, his basketball trophies claiming every inch of shelf space. But now, his 3,500-square-foot home couldn't spare a room for his mother. "I've been looking into some options," he continued, his voice taking on the same tone he used when explaining complicated things to me, slow, patronizing. "There's a really nice assisted living facility just 20 minutes from our house, Willow Creek. They have an excellent rehabilitation program." Assisted living? The words felt foreign in my mouth. "Kevin, I don't need that. I just need a little help temporarily." "Mom, be realistic. Your mobility issues were getting worse even before the fall. Remember Christmas when you couldn't get up from the couch without help? Or that time you dropped the entire casserole because your hands seized up?" Each example landed like a slap. Yes, there had been incidents, moments when my body betrayed me. But they were exceptions, not the rule. Most days I managed fine on my own. "The truth is, you're not safe living alone anymore," Kevin continued. "And Evelyn and I simply don't have the bandwidth to provide the care you need." Bandwidth. Like I was an internet connection using up too much data. Like the woman who had worked 2 jobs to put him through college was now exceeding her allocated space in his life. "I can hire help," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Use some of my savings for a home health aide." "For how long, Mom? A month? 6 months? And then what?" "The doctor said these issues are only going to get worse. You need to be somewhere with professionals." I looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become this stranger in expensive clothes with a perpetually checked watch? This man who spoke about his mother's care like it was an inconvenient business transaction? "Kevin," I said softly, "when your father left, it was just you and me. Do you remember that first apartment? How the heat would cut out in the middle of winter?" A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed his face. "That was a long time ago, Mom. I worked 2 jobs so you could have everything you needed. I never missed a parent-teacher conference. I never missed a game. Are you seriously trying to guilt-trip me right now?" His voice hardened. "Yes, you were a single mom. Yes, it was hard. But that's what parents are supposed to do. Take care of their kids. It doesn't mean the kids owe them for the rest of their lives." The words knocked the breath from my lungs. Is that what you think I'm doing? Collecting on a debt? I think you're not being realistic about your situation. I think you expect me to put my life on hold because you don't want to admit you need more care than I can provide. I felt tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of this person who was once my sweet boy. I don't expect you to put your life on hold, I said carefully. I just thought I meant enough to you that you would want to help me through a difficult time. Something flickered across Kevin's face. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just impatience. He checked his watch again. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Look, I've already spoken to the administrators at Willow Creek. They have an opening starting next week. Your insurance will cover most of it, and I'll handle the difference. You've already made arrangements? Without even discussing it with me first? My voice shook with disbelief. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. He sighed. Mom, this is happening. The house is going on the market next month. Once it sells, you'll have a nice nest egg to supplement your retirement. The house is in my name, I reminded him. You can't just sell it. Actually, I can. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Remember last year when you had that scare with the mini-stroke? You signed a power of attorney giving me authority to handle your financial and medical decisions if you became incapacitated. But I'm not incapacitated, I protested. This is a temporary setback. The doctor disagrees. Your medical chart shows a pattern of declining mobility and increasing risk factors for falls. That's enough to trigger the POA. I felt like I was drowning. How had I not seen this coming? The helpful suggestions that I downsize, the casual questions about my finances, the veiled comments about safety. It had all been leading to this. My son systematically removing me from my own life. Why are you doing this? I whispered. For a moment, Kevin's mask slipped, and I saw raw frustration in his eyes. Do you know what it's like? Getting calls from your neighbors because they found you confused in your front yard in your nightgown? Having my meetings interrupted because you've fallen again? Evelyn and I have our own lives, Mom. We're trying to start a family. We can't be constantly worried about you. I never asked you to worry, I said quietly. You didn't have to ask. It's just there, all the time, this burden I never asked for. There it was. The knife, plunged deep. Burden. The word hung in the antiseptic hospital air between us. I stared at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something inside me harden. All those years of sacrifice, of putting his needs before mine, of being both mother and father, had led to this moment, being labeled a burden by the person I loved most in the world. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply nodded once, the way you might acknowledge a waiter who's brought you the wrong order, but you're too tired to send it back. I'll go pack my things once I'm discharged, I said, my voice remarkably steady. You won't need to worry about me anymore. Kevin had the decency to look uncomfortable at least. Mom, it's not like that. Willow Creek is really nice. They have activities, a garden. You'll make friends. But I wasn't listening anymore. As he continued his sales pitch for the place that would become my prison, I was already planning how I would endure, planning how I would survive, planning how, one day, I would make him understand exactly what he had thrown away. Willow Creek assisted living looked nothing like the brochure. The photos had shown sunlit common rooms with elegant furniture, smiling seniors engaged in watercolor classes, and lush gardens perfect for afternoon strolls. The reality was fluorescent lighting that hummed incessantly, furniture that had seen better days in the early 2000s, and a small courtyard where residents in wheelchairs stared vacantly at a bird feeder that rarely attracted visitors. My apartment was a single room with a hospital bed, a dresser, a minuscule bathroom, and a window overlooking the parking lot. The walls were painted an institutional beige that reminded me of waiting rooms in government offices, places designed for temporary occupation, not living. It's cozy, said the nurse who wheeled me in, her cheerfulness so forced it bordered on manic. Once you add some personal touches, it'll feel just like home. Nothing about this sterile box would ever feel like home. Home was my Victorian cottage with the creaky third stair and the kitchen where I'd measured Kevin's height on the doorframe. Home was the garden where I grew tomatoes every summer, and the reading nook where I'd spent countless evenings with a book and a glass of wine. All of it gone now. Sold without my consent. My belongings either discarded or stored in boxes I was told would be dealt with later. The first week, Kevin visited twice. Brief, awkward encounters where he talked about the weather and asked generic questions about the food. He never mentioned the house or my belongings. He never asked if I was happy here. By the second week, the visits dwindled to one, then to phone calls, then to texts that felt copy-pasted, devoid of any real emotion or interest. Hope you're settling in well. Evelyn and I are busy with work. Talk soon. I watched from my window as his BMW pulled into the lot each Saturday, precisely at 2 p.m. He would stay for exactly 47 minutes, just long enough to ease whatever guilt he carried, not long enough to risk me mentioning going home. During those visits, he'd talk endlessly about his work, his upcoming promotion, the vacation he and Evelyn were planning to Bali. When I tried to discuss my life, the indignities of group showers, the roommate who screamed all night, the aide who stole my wedding ring, his eyes would glaze over. "Let's not focus on the negative, Mom," he'd say with that patronizing smile. "The doctor says your outlook is important for your recovery." Recovery. As if I were sick rather than imprisoned. During the third month, he brought news. He and Evelyn were expecting my first grandchild. I should have felt joy, but all I felt was a creeping dread. Would this child know me as anything other than the old woman in the facility they visited on holidays? Would they, too, one day see me as nothing but a burden? "That's wonderful," I said, the words mechanical. "I'm very happy for you both." "We thought you would be," Kevin replied, completely missing the hollowness in my voice. "We're converting the guest room, well, what would have been your room, into a nursery. Evelyn's already picked out the theme. Safari animals." I nodded, imagining the room that could have been mine now filled with painted giraffes and elephants. A room where I could have helped care for my grandchild, could have sung lullabies and told stories of their father as a boy. "The house sold," he added casually, checking his phone. "Over asking price. The market's hot right now." "My house?" I clarified, my voice tight. He had the grace to look uncomfortable at least. "Yes, the closing is next week. I've put the money in a trust for your care." "A trust?" I repeated. "So I don't have access to my own money from my own house?" "It's for your own protection, Mom," he said, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "This way, your care is guaranteed for the foreseeable future." The foreseeable future. The rest of my life in this beige box, dependent on others for everything from my meals to my medication. "And my things?" I asked quietly. "My photographs? My mother's china? Most of it's in storage," he said vaguely. "Some pieces Evelyn wanted to keep in the family. Your grandmother's secretary desk. A few of the silver pieces. Keep in the family. As if I were already dead." I said nothing. What was there to say? That I had spent 40 years collecting those silver pieces? That the secretary desk was where I had written every birthday card, every note of encouragement I'd ever given him? That those photographs were the only tangible memories I had left of a life now gone? As the weeks passed, my bitterness grew, but so did my determination. If Kevin thought I would wither away in this place, content to be visited when convenient and forgotten the rest of the time, he was mistaken. I began to rebuild myself, piece by jagged piece. The physical therapy I had initially resisted became my salvation. I pushed harder than the therapists recommended, gritting my teeth through the pain. I befriended a former nurse among the residents who showed me additional exercises. By the 5th month, I had graduated from the walker to a cane. By the 7th, I could manage short distances with no support at all. I found allies among the staff, particularly Darlene, a night nurse with a rebellious streak and contempt for families who dumped their elders and rarely visited. She smuggled in real coffee for me, not the watered-down brew they served in the dining room, and occasionally a nip of bourbon. "My mother always said good whiskey keeps the joints loose." She'd wink as she slipped the airplane bottle into my sweater pocket. More importantly, Darlene let me use her phone. Cell service in the facility was spotty, and my calls were monitored through their landline system. But with Darlene's phone, I could make private calls. To a lawyer who explained my rights regarding the power of attorney, to a financial advisor who helped me understand what options remained to me, to former neighbors who updated me on the young couple who had bought my house and were painting the exterior a hideous shade of green. I learned that while Kevin had legal authority over certain aspects of my care, he didn't own me. The trust he'd established with the proceeds from my house was legally mine. I couldn't dissolve it without his signature, but I could redirect how it was used. I could, with proper medical certification, challenge the determination that I needed assisted living care, and I learned something else, something that would change everything between Kevin and me forever. It began innocently enough. I asked Darlene to look up Evelyn's company online. I was curious about this big project that had been too important for them to temporarily house me during my recovery. Darlene not only found the company website, but Evelyn's professional social media profiles as well. There, in public posts dating back years, I discovered photos of work events, charity galas, office parties, all attended by both Evelyn and Kevin. Photos that directly contradicted stories Kevin had told me about business trips and late nights at the office. Photos that showed him and Evelyn in tropical locations during weeks when he'd claimed he couldn't visit because he was swamped with work. People post their whole lives online these days, Darlene commented, scrolling through the images. No sense of privacy, or no fear of discovery. As I looked at those photographs, at the elaborate vacations and luxury purchases documented in detail, a cold suspicion began to form. Where was this money coming from? Kevin earned well as a financial analyst, and Evelyn's marketing career was successful, but the lifestyle displayed in these images suggested something more. Something like an inheritance meant for long-term care that was being systematically drained for their benefit. My suspicions about Kevin and Evelyn's finances consumed me. Night after night, I lay awake in my narrow bed, piecing together conversations, throwaway comments, the lifestyle I'd glimpsed during my brief visit to their home, the designer furniture, Evelyn's collection of handbags displayed like museum pieces, the wine cellar Kevin had mentioned installing, all while claiming they couldn't afford the burden of my care. How do I find out what's happening with my trust? I asked Darlene one night as she slipped me my contraband coffee. She considered this, her expression thoughtful. You need someone with banking experience, someone who understands finance but isn't connected to your son. As luck would have it, Willow Creek had recently admitted a new resident, Bernard Kopinski, a retired bank examiner with the FDIC. Bernie, as he preferred to be called, had suffered a stroke that left him with a slight speech impediment, but hadn't touched his razor-sharp mind. He'd been placed here by an overwhelmed daughter-in-law after his son died unexpectedly. Bernie and I formed an alliance over complaints about the bland food and mutual distaste for the forced cheerfulness of group activities. When I cautiously broached the subject of my financial concerns, his watery blue eyes sharpened with interest. "You need to see the accounting," he said simply. "As beneficiary, you have rights." With Bernie's guidance and Darlene's smuggled phone, I contacted the trust administrator directly. I positioned my request as simple curiosity, a mother's interest in her son's excellent management. The administrator, perhaps flattered by my praise of the firm's professionalism, agreed to send quarterly statements to me directly at Willow Creek. The first envelope arrived 3 weeks later. Bernie and I pored over it in his room, the door firmly closed against prying eyes. "This is..." Bernie paused, his finger tracing a particular line item. "Unusual." "What is it?" I leaned forward, struggling to make sense of the financial jargon. "These withdrawals, they're listed as medical expenses, but they're going to a company called Argent Futures LLC. That's not a healthcare provider." My heart rate quickened. "What is it then?" Bernie shook his head. "I'd need to research it, but medical expenses should go directly to Willow Creek or other providers, not a separate company." Over the next month, Bernie used the facility's ancient computer to investigate. Argent Futures, it turned out, was a holding company registered in Kevin's name. A holding company that had received over $150,000 from my trust in medical expense payments over the past year. "He's stealing from you," Bernie said bluntly. "Using your money for his own purposes while keeping you here in the cheapest arrangement possible." I felt strangely calm at this confirmation, perhaps because Deep down, I had already known. The son who had called me a burden, who had discarded me without a second thought, would naturally see my assets as his rightful inheritance. Why wait until I was dead to claim them? But knowing and proving were different matters. I needed evidence that would stand up to scrutiny, evidence that would be impossible to explain away. We need more, I told Bernie. Enough to take to the authorities if necessary. Bernie's eyes glinted with purpose. As a former fraud investigator, he had found our project invigorating. A chance to use his skills again after months of patronizing activities and early bedtimes. We need a forensic accountant, he said. Someone who can trace where the money ultimately went. This presented a challenge. We couldn't simply hire someone without Kevin finding out. But Bernie had connections. Former colleagues still in the business who owed him favors. Through a complicated arrangement involving Darlene's phone and Bernie's old work email, we secured the help of a recently retired forensic accountant named Marjorie, who agreed to review our documents pro bono. "Fraud against seniors makes my blood boil," she wrote in her email. "Send me everything you have." While waiting for Marjorie's analysis, I made another discovery, one that shook me to my core. During one of Kevin's increasingly rare visits, he mentioned casually that Evelyn was having a complicated pregnancy and had been placed on bed rest. "The doctors are monitoring her closely," he said, scrolling through his phone as usual. "The genetic counselor says everything looks okay, though." "Genetic counselor?" I asked. "Is there concern about the baby?" Kevin looked up, seeming to realize he'd said more than intended. "Just routine testing. Evelyn's family has some history of cystic fibrosis, so they did carrier screening for both of us." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the conversation nagged at me. Kevin had never mentioned genetic testing before. Was there something he wasn't telling me? The next morning, I asked Darlene if she could help me understand more about genetic testing during pregnancy. She brought me printouts about the different screenings commonly performed. "Most couples just do the basic carrier screening," she explained. "Tests for common genetic conditions. But some do more extensive testing, especially if there's family history or advanced maternal age." "What kind of family history would be concerning?" I asked, thinking of Evelyn's supposed cystic fibrosis connection. "Oh, all sorts of things. Tay-Sachs, sickle cell, Huntington's, hemophilia." She paused. "Actually, your son might have gotten tested for hemophilia considering your family history." I stared at her blankly. "We don't have hemophilia in our family." Darlene frowned. "I could have sworn. When Kevin filled out your medical intake forms, he checked yes for family history of hemophilia. Said it came from his father's side." My blood ran cold. Kevin's father, Dylan, had many faults, but hemophilia wasn't one of them. I knew his medical history intimately. The mild hypertension, the seasonal allergies, the bad knee from a college football injury. There had never been any mention of hemophilia or any bleeding disorder. Unless... The thought that formed in my mind was so unexpected, so world-altering, that at first I refused to acknowledge it. But once there, it grew roots, connecting disparate memories I had long buried. Dylan's business trip to Seattle the summer before I got pregnant. My old college friend Jimmy, who had visited for 2 weeks while Dylan was away. The inexplicable tension when Dylan returned. The way he had looked at Kevin sometimes, with a question in his eyes that I had deliberately ignored. Could it be possible? After all these years? I needed to know for certain. And modern science had given me a way to find out without alerting Kevin to my suspicions. DNA testing kits had become commonplace, advertised on television and available in drugstores. People used them to discover their ancestry, to connect with distant relatives, to learn about their genetic predispositions. I had never had any interest in them before. My family history was well documented, my health issues already manifested. But now, I saw another use entirely. "Darlene," I said carefully during her next night shift, "have you ever used one of those DNA testing services? The ones that tell you about your ancestry?" Darlene smiled. "Sure have. Found out I'm 22% Scandinavian, if you can believe it. My husband did it too. We compared our results. It's fascinating what they can tell you. And they can show you relatives? People who share your DNA? Oh yes," she nodded enthusiastically. My husband found a half-sister he never knew about. His father had quite the secret life, apparently. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Could you help me get one of those kits? I asked. I'd like to know more about my ancestry, for Kevin's baby, so they'll know their heritage. Darlene, bless her heart, didn't question my sudden interest in genealogy. 2 days later, she brought me a small box containing a DNA testing kit from one of the most popular services. Just follow the instructions, she said. You spit in the tube, seal it up, and mail it back. Results come in a few weeks. I thanked her profusely, then waited until she left before examining the kit more closely. The instructions were simple enough. What mattered more was what came after. Accessing the results online, navigating the website to find what I was looking for. For that, I would need Bernie's help again. The DNA test results arrived in my email 6 weeks later. Bernie helped me access them on his laptop, his hands trembling slightly with the excitement of co-conspiracy. Are you sure you want to see this? He asked, finger hovering over the mouse button. Once you know, you can't unknow. I nodded firmly. I need to know. The website loaded, colorful charts of my genetic heritage appearing on screen. Predominantly Western European, with sprinklings of Eastern European and Mediterranean. Nothing surprising there. But that wasn't what I was looking for. Bernie navigated to the DNA matches section. At the top were close relatives, people sharing substantial portions of DNA with me. The system had already identified parent-child and sibling relationships for many users. Kevin wasn't in the database, of course. He had no reason to submit his DNA for testing. But someone else was there. Someone whose presence confirmed everything I had begun to suspect. Jimmy Miller, my college friend, the man who had stayed with me that summer while Dylan was away. The system labeled him as a predicted first cousin, but I knew better. The timing, the percentage of shared DNA, it all pointed to one conclusion. Jimmy was Kevin's biological father. Is this what you expected? Bernie asked quietly, watching my face. Yes, I whispered. And no. I had suspected it, but suspicion was different from confirmation. All these years, I had convinced myself that the timing had been coincidental, that my brief indiscretion with Jimmy had happened weeks before I conceived Kevin. I had buried the possibility so deeply that I had almost forgotten it myself. Almost. Dylan must have had his suspicions too. It would explain his increasing emotional distance, his eventual abandonment when Kevin was 8. Had he seen something of Jimmy and Kevin's features as the boy grew? Had some genetic trait, a particular way of smiling, a gesture, given away what I had tried so desperately to hide? The irony wasn't lost on me. Kevin, who had discarded me so callously, who had called me a burden, was himself the product of a broken trust, a secret I had carried alone for over 40 years. And now I had proof. What will you do with this information? Bernie asked, his voice neutral, free of judgment. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Willow Creek. Somewhere across town, Kevin and Evelyn were preparing for their child's arrival, redecorating my would-be room as a nursery, spending my money on luxury items while I sat in this institutional cage. I'm going to wait, I said finally, for the right moment. That moment presented itself sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Kevin called, an actual phone call, not a text, with news. Mom, I've been meaning to tell you. Evelyn and I are having a small wedding ceremony next month. I blinked in surprise. I thought you were already married. They had been together for years, living as a couple. I had always assumed they had made it official along the way. Legally, yes. We did a courthouse thing when we bought the house. But with the baby coming, Evelyn wants to do something more traditional. Her parents are flying in, just immediate family and a few close friends. I waited for the invitation that didn't come. Anyway, he continued, I thought you should know. The doctor says Evelyn needs to avoid stress, so we're keeping it very small. Translation: I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding. I swallowed the bitter pill and forced warmth into my voice. That sounds lovely, Kevin. I'm happy for you both. Thanks, Mom. His relief at my easy acceptance was palpable. I'll send pictures. Pictures. As if that were an adequate substitute for being present at my only child's wedding. Actually, I said carefully, I was hoping I might attend. My physical therapy has been going very well. I can manage with just a cane now. There was a long pause. I don't think that would work, Mom. The venue isn't very accessible, and like I said, we're keeping it very small. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. What I understood was that I was an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a reminder of mortality that would cast a shadow over their perfect day. But, he added, perhaps sensing my disappointment, we are having a rehearsal dinner the night before, at Corsetti's. Nothing fancy, just a casual get-together. Maybe you could come to that? I could arrange transportation. I recognized the olive branch for what it was, the minimum gesture required to alleviate his guilt. But I also recognized an opportunity. I'd like that very much, I said softly. After hanging up, I immediately went to find Darlene. I needed her help with several things: arranging for a day pass from Willow Creek, securing appropriate clothing for the dinner, and most importantly, printing certain documents I would need to bring with me. The results from Marjorie's forensic accounting investigation had arrived the day before, and they were damning. Not only had Kevin been siphoning money from my trust for personal expenses, but he had also taken out a second mortgage on my house before selling it. Money that had never been placed in the trust at all. The documentation clearly showed his signature on the loan papers, the wire transfers to his personal accounts, the elaborate shell game he had created to hide the theft. Combined with the DNA test results, I now held in my hands the power to destroy my son's life as thoroughly as he had destroyed mine. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for a Thursday evening in late November. As the date approached, I found myself oddly calm. Where once there had been pain and betrayal, now there was only cold purpose. I selected my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that Darlene helped me find online, modest but elegant. I wore my best jewelry, the few pieces I had managed to keep when Kevin cleared out my house. I took extra care with my hair and makeup, determined that no one at the dinner would see me as a frail old woman to be pitied. Darlene helped me prepare a small gift bag as well. Inside was an envelope containing 2 documents, the forensic accounting report detailing Kevin's financial fraud, and a printout of the DNA test results confirming that Dylan was not Kevin's biological father. I had highlighted the relevant sections in bright yellow. "Are you sure about this?" Darlene asked as she helped me into the transport van that would take me to the restaurant. "Once you do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, clutching the gift bag on my lap. He made his choice when he abandoned me. Now I'm making mine. The ride to Corsetti's took 20 minutes. I spent it looking out the window at the city I had once called home. The streets and buildings now strangely unfamiliar after my months of confinement at Willow Creek. The driver helped me out of the van and handed me my cane. I stood for a moment outside the restaurant, gathering my strength. Through the windows, I could see people already gathered. Kevin in a charcoal suit, Evelyn in a cream-colored dress that barely concealed her pregnancy. Older couples I assumed were her parents and other relatives. A scattering of friends laughing and drinking. My family, and yet not my family. A celebration from which I had been deliberately excluded. I straightened my shoulders, gripped my cane firmly, and walked through the door. The hostess greeted me with a professional smile. "Welcome to Corsetti's. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here for the Marchwood-Callahan rehearsal dinner," I said. Her eyes flicked to my cane, then back to my face. "Of course. Right this way." She led me through the dining room toward a private area at the back. I could see the moment Kevin spotted me. His conversation halted mid-sentence, his face registering first surprise, then that particular blend of obligation and annoyance he reserved for me. "Mom?" he said, coming forward to greet me. I was about to call. The van service said they'd be late. "I asked them to come early," I replied. I didn't want to miss anything. He kissed my cheek perfunctorily and guided me toward a table at the edge of the room, far from the center of festivities, I noted. As if even here, he wanted to keep me peripheral. "Evelyn's parents are eager to meet you," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Let me introduce you after everyone gets settled." I sat in the assigned seat, placed my gift bag carefully under the table, and observed. The room was filled with about 30 people, most in their 30s or 40s. all dressed in the kind of casual elegance that bespoke wealth and confidence. These were people who had never known real hardship, who had never had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying new school shoes for their child. Kevin moved among them with practiced ease, his hand on Evelyn's lower back, the very picture of the successful young couple on the brink of expanding their perfect life. He caught me watching and raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to his conversation. I sipped my water and waited. The moment would come. All I needed was patience. Dinner was served, an elaborate affair of seared scallops, arugula salad, and filet mignon that I barely tasted. Throughout the meal, I watched Kevin work the room, stopping at every table except mine. Evelyn's parents had been seated at the center table, their promised introduction to me apparently forgotten. I didn't mind. The less conversation before my moment, the better. After the dessert plates were cleared, a server circulated with champagne flutes. Kevin moved to the center of the room, tapping his glass gently with a spoon. "If I could have everyone's attention," he called, his smile dazzling. "Evelyn and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Tomorrow we'll make official what's been true in our hearts for years." Appreciative murmurs rippled through the gathering. Kevin continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence he used for business presentations. "I particularly want to thank John and Evelyn," he nodded to Evelyn's parents, "for their incredible generosity and support. The house renovation, the nursery. We couldn't have done it without you." My hand tightened around my cane. House renovation? The one funded by the second mortgage on my home, no doubt. And of course, Kevin's gaze swept briefly in my direction. "Thanks to my mother for joining us tonight. Not thanks for raising me alone. Not thanks for sacrificing everything so I could succeed. Just thanks for joining us tonight," as if I were a casual acquaintance who had dropped by. Several people glanced curiously in my direction, clearly surprised by my presence. I saw a few whispered exchanges, no doubt wondering why the mother of the groom was seated alone at a peripheral table. As the toast continued, Evelyn's father offering heartfelt wishes, the best man sharing amusing anecdotes, I waited patiently. When the formal speeches concluded and guests began to mingle again, I knew my moment had arrived. I rose slowly from my seat, using my cane for support, and made my way toward the small area where Kevin stood chatting with Evelyn's parents. He saw me approaching, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face before his public smile reasserted itself. "Mom," he said too loudly, "come meet John and Evelyn. Evelyn's parents." "Actually," I said, matching his volume, "I was hoping to offer a toast myself. It is customary for the mother of the groom to say a few words, isn't it?" Kevin's smile tightened. "We've finished the formal toasts, Mom, but perhaps tomorrow—" "It will only take a moment," I insisted, still smiling. "And since I won't be at the ceremony tomorrow, this is my only chance." A strange hush fell over those within earshot. The mother of the groom not attending the wedding? Kevin's face flushed with embarrassment. "Of course," he conceded stiffly. "Everyone?" He raised his voice. "My mother would like to say a few words." The room quieted. All eyes turned toward me. I drew myself up to my full height, ignoring the familiar ache in my hip, and raised my champagne flute. The moment I had planned for months had finally arrived. "For those who don't know me," I began, my voice steady, "I'm Amelia Marchwood, Kevin's mother, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share some reflections on our journey together." Kevin's smile remained fixed, but wariness had crept into his eyes. "I became a mother at 22, I continued. A single mother by 30. I worked 2 jobs to put this man through college. I postponed dreams, canceled vacations, wore the same winter coat for a decade so he could have every opportunity." The room had gone completely silent now. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain where this was going. And then, 2 years ago, I had an accident. A fall that left me temporarily unable to care for myself. I reached out to my son, the only family I had left in the world, for help. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Kevin's expression had turned to alarm. He knew what was coming. "To the man who owes everything to a woman he abandoned," I said, raising my glass higher. "To the man who called his mother a burden he never asked for, and dumped her in a retirement home while he sold her house and stole her money. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Evelyn's mother covered her mouth with her hand. Kevin's face had drained of all color. "Mom, that's not— You don't understand," he stammered. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that while I was confined to a room the size of your walk-in closet, you were renovating your home with the proceeds from a fraudulent second mortgage on my property." I reached into my purse and withdrew the forensic accounting report, holding it aloft. "I have the documentation right here. Every dollar you diverted from my trust. Every cent of the second mortgage you took out without my knowledge. Every penny you stole while claiming you couldn't afford to care for me." Kevin lunged forward, attempting to grab the papers. "Mother, you're confused. The medications they have you on—" "I'm not confused, Kevin," I said coldly, pulling the documents out of his reach. "I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. And there's one more thing I've seen clearly." From my purse, I withdrew the second document, the DNA test results. "Did you know they can test for paternity now with just a saliva sample? Amazing technology." I held the paper where he could see the highlighted section. "It seems Dylan had good instincts when he left us. He must have suspected what I've confirmed. He wasn't your biological father." The blood that had drained from Kevin's face suddenly rushed back. "What are you talking about?" "The DNA doesn't lie, Kevin. Dylan wasn't your father. Which means, legally speaking, you have no claim to the Marchwood family trust, the trust your grandfather left specifically to his blood descendants." This was stretching the truth slightly. The trust had been left to me, not directly to Kevin, but judging by his expression of horror, he didn't know that. "You're lying," he whispered. "Am I?" I smiled thinly. "Feel free to test it yourself. The results will be the same. As of this moment, I'm having you removed as trustee of my estate. I've already spoken with the attorneys." I turned to the stunned gathering. "I apologize for disrupting your lovely evening. I just thought you should all know exactly who you're celebrating. A man who abandons his mother when she becomes inconvenient. A man who steals from the woman who sacrificed everything for him." Evelyn had gone pale, one hand protectively covering her pregnant belly. Her father's expression had hardened into something like disgust as he looked at Kevin. "One last thing," I said, reaching into my purse for the final document. The revised will I had signed that morning in the presence of 2 witnesses. "I've changed my will, effective immediately. Every cent I have will go to the Elder Justice Center, a nonprofit that protects seniors from abuse and financial exploitation by their own families." I placed the will on the table and turned to leave. Kevin grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "You can't do this," he hissed, his voice low, desperate. "Think about the baby, your grandchild." I looked down at his hand until he released me. "I am thinking about the baby," I said quietly. "I'm thinking about what kind of father you'll be, what kind of example you'll set. And I'm grateful that child will never know me as the burden you described." I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, my steps steady despite the ache in my hip. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. I had arranged for the van to pick me up an hour later, anticipating a longer event, so I settled on a bench to wait, oddly at peace. Inside, I knew chaos had erupted. Kevin would be desperately trying to explain, to minimize, to lie. But the documents I had left behind spoke for themselves. The comfortable life he had built on deceit was crumbling, and nothing he could say would rebuild it. Some might call what I did cruel. Perhaps it was. But Kevin had taught me an important lesson during those months of abandonment. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Family is defined by actions, not genetics. In the end, I had given my son exactly what he had given me. The cold, hard truth about who he really was, delivered without mercy at the moment it would hurt most. Justice served. The accounts balanced at last. As I waited for my ride back to Willow Creek, where I would begin making arrangements to move to a better facility, one of my own choosing, I felt neither joy nor sorrow, only the quiet satisfaction of a debt repaid in full.